I have you loud and clear.
Hello. Welcome. Science.
And that is to say,
physics, medicine, nature,
or
Space. Time.
the brain,
Life. The universe.
Hello, welcome to The Naked Scientists. I'm Chris Smith, and this is the show where we bring you the latest breakthroughs in science and technology. And this week we're asking, how long can someone hold their breath? And can you train for this? Who are fitter, footballers or rugby players? And what's the most intelligent insect? That's right, we're answering your science questions about science, technology and medicine. So if there's something you've always wondered about, this is your chance to scratch that scientific itch.
The Naked Scientists podcast is powered by ukfast.co.uk.
Now with me to help answer the questions that you're sending us are from the University of York, behavioural scientist. She works on insects, Eleanor Drinkwater. What have you been up to? You were telling me you've been stung.
Yes. Well, I'm a very keen beekeeper, and I made the very rookie mistake of not zipping up my own bee suit the other day, and I can tell you that was bitterly regretted the next day, but it's very much a mark of pride among beekeepers.
Well, no, you're not a proper paid-up beekeeper until you've had at least one anaphylaxis.
Well, hopefully no anaphylaxis. That's a bad thing when that happens. But if you work with bees, you do occasionally get stung.
Yeah. How's it going, the beekeeping?
Really, really good fun. We have an absolutely lovely queen in one of our hives at the moment. The other one's a bit more grumpy, so they're a bit more of a... It's true.
My brother keeps bees, Eleanor, and he says the same thing. He said that as the queens get older, and also certain colonies just have a particularly aggressive behaviour.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's something to do with the queen squirting out pheromones that keeps everyone calm. And as the queen ages, she makes less of them.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. And the character of the queen, or the chemicals that she produces, has a really big impact on the behaviour of all the other bees in the colony. So if you have a really nasty queen, then you can swap out for a really friendly queen, and suddenly the hive becomes a lot more friendly to work with. So it's really incredible. Yes, not as much as we were hoping, unfortunately, but yes, definitely enough to be getting on with.
Eleanor, thank you. So any questions you have about insects, perhaps even bees, bee stings and beekeeping, ask Eleanor. Dan Gordon's also with us. Dan's an exercise physiologist. He's at Anglia Ruskin University. He's also a Paralympian, and he's got a world record. And there was a lot of coverage in recent weeks about athletes using sports drinks and it not being terribly good for their dental health.
Yeah, it came out about 10 days ago. Quite a large-ranging study that was looking at elite athletes, and they reported that the dental health in elite athletes was far, far worse than in the general population. Although the paper didn't fully attribute it to it, they one of the main conclusions was they thought it was down to the kind of sports drinks that are consumed, which mostly these high carbohydrates.
Just because they're loaded with sugar.
Loaded with sugar. Yeah.
How's your dentition doing? You all right?
Well, I think I got away with it. Actually, yeah, I think so. Yeah.
What are they advocating that sports practitioners do then? Just because you can't not have energy to do the events.
No, and I think in the end, what they're really getting at, I suppose, is that there's got to be greater scrutiny of the health of the teeth in the athletes. I mean, when I was competing, one of the things we had to do before we went to the Paralympics, every athlete had to have a full dental check, which sounds a crazy thing to do. You're going to Olympic Games. Actually, you wouldn't think that the teeth are that important, but actually, the worst thing you can have at an Olympic Games is
toothache.
Ruin
your day.
And so one of the things that's really being advocated now is that part of the athlete support program, part of lifestyle management, should be to actually monitor the health of the teeth.
Do you think warning people there is this risk? They'll probably take more care about washing their mouth out to get rid of the extra sugar, etc.
I think more use of things like mouth rinses, cleaning the teeth more regularly, for example, as part of the training routine.
So any questions about exercise physiology, how the body works, sports and sports fitness, Dan's your man. Now, next to Dan is Fran. Do you see what I did there? Wonderful. Fran is a Cambridge University physicist. She is an astrophysicist, cosmologist, interested in how the universe at large works, but you're also a stand-up comedian as well. How's that going?
That's right.
I'm not going to do the horrible thing, because the minute you tell anyone you're a comedian, say, oh, go on then, tell us a joke. I won't do that. How is that going?
It's going pretty well. I'm writing a new show at the moment about kind of the philosophy of science and what we're really doing when we're doing science. So that has been a bit of a step back from the day-to-day of my research.
But is that,
really nice.
are you poking fun at it, or are you kind of making light of what life as a scientist and a researcher is like? Is that the thrust of the show?
I'm poking fun at it, but there's also, I think, a serious element of it, and I hope people will come away knowing a bit more about, I've been told I'm participating in the scientific method, but I never really examined what that meant until now.
You're going to find out.
Yeah.
You were also saying to me just before we started about the story that came out earlier this year, the first picture of a black hole, or rather the first impression of a black hole. And that's actually going to be made into a movie rather than just a bunch of static pictures now, you were saying.
Yeah, that's right. So you might remember the Event Horizon Telescope a few months ago published the first image of a black hole, or more pedantically, the shadow of a black hole, I suppose. And then now they're going to do a full colour movie of the black hole, which is going to be really incredible, both in terms of what it will teach us about astrophysics and general relativity, and also it's just super cool. You'll be able to watch a black hole on YouTube.
Yeah, or you could just watch some telly programmes which amount to much of the same thing. There's just no content visible whatsoever. Thank you very much, Fran. So anything to do with how the universe works and space, anything like that, please send those questions in. Fran will be happy to consider those. Also with us, Bobby Seagull, who needs very little introduction. He's originally from Cambridge University. He's a mathematician and teaches maths, teach kids maths. And actually, you've been doing a telly programme with Eric Monkman, haven't you?
Yes.
Going around the country looking at inventions and things.
Absolutely.
How's that going?
Eric Monkman, for those who maybe need a reminder, is the University Challenge icon. He is the icon of icons. I'm his friend.
Well, you were pretty iconic. But you were pretty iconic on there as well. You were quite good.
Thank you. That's very gregarious and outgoing. But we had a first series initially looking at a genius guide to Britain. So travelling around in a mini car. Imagine like Top Gear meets QI, but sort of exploring all the curious bits of Britain. And the new series is called A Genius Guide to the Age of Invention. So Eric and I get back in our mini car, go around the UK, but this time it's quite chronological. So we're looking at from 1750 to 1900 and exploring Britain's discoveries and inventions in that period.
Why did you pick that period? Because it's a particularly golden period, or was there some other reason?
I think it's the golden nature of that period, because obviously if you look before that, it's sort of like Britain is still pre-Enlightenment, before industrial times. And then in that period of 1750 to 900, lots of inventions, discoveries, like chemistry's been discovered, physics, science, the word science, scientist comes into being, Darwin, Thomson. So lots of great figures of science emerge.
Any particularly standout moment? Because there always are, when you're making telly programmes, there are always funny things that we never see on screen, or other things that are just wow moments that you never thought you'd find yourself doing.
So one of my standout moments actually isn't a standout moment for me, but is a standout moment for the show. So we visit the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge, and we get to hold one of the original cathode ray tubes that J.J. Thomson used. But I was too much of a chicken to hold it. Genuinely, I was like, no, I can't. It's like someone else's baby. You can look at it, admire it, but if you want to hold it, no, I don't want to hold it. I'll take a selfie. I'm not going to hold the baby.
It'd be quite tempting to hold it and they go, whoops, oh, no. Because the same thing sort of happened to me, because when I was in South Africa, when I first went to South Africa, I was at a conference, and this big American guy came up to me at the conference and he said, tomorrow I'm going to pick you up from your hotel and I'm going to take you somewhere and show you something that's going to change your life forever. Now, of course, when you never met this guy, you think that could mean a range of things. And actually, he took me to the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, where he's professor of paleoanthropology. This is Lee Berger, who's now been on this programme a number of times and has discovered not one, not two, but 3 new species of early human ancestor. And he had in this wooden box at the university the complete facial skeleton of the Tong child, which is the specimen, which is the Australopithecus holotype. In other words, all of the Australopith specimens that we have, these are early human ancestors from maybe 3 million years ago or so. They're all compared to this one, which was discovered by Raymond Dart about 100 years ago now. And it's really fabulous. They've even got the endocast, the fossil remnant of the brain of this thing. And I was holding this thing in my hands. It's 3 million years old. And it's the only one in existence. And I did get tempted to go, whoops, like that. But Lee was very, very cautious. He had his hands under mine all the time, because you think, this is just priceless. But I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
Now, for you at home, and also for you guys in the studio, we've got a little Guess Who that we run through these sorts of programmes. We give you a sequence of clues across the show, and as the show unfolds, we give you more of them. And the first one I've got here, it's an animal, I'll give you that much, but can you work out what makes this particular sound. Okay, there you go. That was the sound it makes. Any clues? You want to hear it? Oh, they're really fussy, this lot. They want to hear it again. Okay. Anyone got any ideas?
It's not a seagull, I can tell you.
No, it's not a Bobby Seagull. No, okay, more clues coming up. Eleanor, let's kick off with this one for you from Mariana.
What is the most intelligent insect?
Whoa, not bees, because, well, maybe they sting, but they stung you.
Well, okay, so I have been asked this before, and this is always a really hard question because I am incredibly biased and I believe that all insects are incredibly intelligent in all sorts of different ways, and that we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of what insects can do. It could be the case that we haven't even discovered the cleverest insect. But if I was to choose one based on research about an individual who's pretty clever, it might have to be the bees, I'm afraid. So some really cool research has shown that bees can tell apart the difference between different painting styles. So if you show them a Monet and a Picasso, you can get them to learn the differences and then be able to generalize to other paintings. And also...
And which do they prefer, out of interest?
I don't know. Maybe that'd be a follow-up paper. I hope it would. But also they can tell the difference between people's faces, and they can remember a face for 2 days, which is incredible.
There was also a study that the researchers at Queen Mary University of London published a couple of years ago, where they showed another bee rolling a ball into a goal, and the bee that was watching then learned how to get the bee ball into the bee goal and get a treat.
Yeah, it was
so social learning.
Yeah, and more than that, they did a follow-on from that, which was even more cool. So they trained it on one particular ball, and they had other balls in the area which they'd glued down while they were learning. But then in the second round, they unglued the balls, and the bee would learn the concept and then would apply it to closer balls. So then they would perform the same action, but on a separate. So they weren't just learning, oh, this ball goes in the hole. They could like generalize, which is incredible if you think about it.
Anyone else got a favourite insect in the studio?
Everyone should.
Ooh,
Everyone should.
I have the cicada.
Oh, I know why you're going to go with that, because they come out on prime number years, don't they? Every 13 or 17 years, cicadas emerge, don't they?
They do.
To minimise the chances of their mating year coinciding with predators.
Exactly. And I always tell my students that on a Friday afternoon, these cicadas are probably smarter than my students on a Friday 2 o'clock.
Maybe even smarter than the lecturer. You never know. There's a provocative thought. Dan, a favourite insect?
I don't know. I suppose possibly the butterfly. Just purely because I just love the whole the process from chrysalis to butterfly, but actually just the sheer variety of butterflies.
Yeah.
I think it's just mind-boggling.
They also do amazing feats of navigation. The butterflies, the monarch butterflies, for example, all the way from Canada down to New Mexico and that kind of environs. It's thousands of miles that these tiny insects make, and they actually navigate. They use their body clock and the position of the sun to navigate, and you think, this is a tiny insect. And, I can't even find my way around London. And these things find their way. They're just an insect. I do find that quite amazing.
Yeah, but you shouldn't say just an insect. You mean an insect.
Sorry, Eleanor. Sorry. Didn't mean to insult you, Eleanor. Now, Dan, one for you. Ben has got this question and would like you to help him out. He says, who is fitter, rugby player or football player? Well, this is a loaded question, isn't it? So,
yeah. This is one of those, it's a bit like the insect question. This is a classic question. And it's actually, without wanting to sit on the fence, it's actually really difficult to say, because you have to think what we mean by fitness. So actually a footballer is fit to play football. A rugby player is fit to play rugby. So I could sit on the fence and go, well, actually, we don't really know. Well, we know a little bit more. I mean, if we look at, say, basic cardiorespiratory fitness, what's interesting is that they're pretty similar. So if we take what's called the VO2 max, the maximum amount of oxygen that somebody can consume, the general population has a score of about 40 to 45 millilitres per kilogram per minute of oxygen. Male footballer is in the region of about 55 to 58, and a male rugby player is in a very, very similar region. Where it gets quite fascinating is when you look at things like distances covered. So the distances covered in a game of football, the midfielder's running about 11 to 14 kilometres. Referees are actually running more, which is just a side issue. In rugby, actually, again, it's positional dependent. So if you're playing as a forward, then clearly you're not going to run as much as, for example, a midfielder. But when you get into things like measures of strength, now we start to see the difference. Clearly, rugby players are able to exert more force per unit of mass. Are they more powerful? Again, it depends on the position that you're playing. So it is a slightly loaded question. So if you were going to compare them on the old classic TV show, if you remember Superstars, I mean, I used to love Superstars, and you compared them, actually it was interesting that rugby players never used to do as well on Superstars compared to footballers. And the aim of that programme was that you always compared people across different sports that took them out of their own events. And so going back to that era when we had Superstars, then one might argue tentatively that a footballer is fitter than a rugby player.
It's going to be a question of sort of horses for courses, isn't it? Because if you took a rugby player, they're not going to be very good at the pole vault, are they? Let's be honest. But then a pole vaulter is not going to be very good at rugby.
Exactly that. I mean, I always say to my students, who's fitter, a sumo wrestler or a marathon runner? Of course, they go marathon runner. And you go, yeah, but no. But because they're just not. They're fit for running a marathon, but they are not fit to be a sumo wrestler. And actually, you start getting down to genetics. So actually, there is no way you're ever going to take a footballer and turn a footballer into a prop forward. Yeah. It's just not going to happen. They don't have the genetics for building muscle mass. They don't have the genetics for force generation. And the flip side is the same for football. In football, there's a lot of this work to do with what we call stretch shortening cycle, which is this idea of fast force production. Rugby players don't have that kind of fast force production as a football player. So you have got that large genetic component as well.
Dan, thank you very much for that. So I think we're basically going to have to sit on the fence with that. Bobby, over to you. Dee is pondering about pie, and this is the mathematical pie rather than fruitcake or anything like that. She says,
does pie really go on forever?
What she's referring to is the fact that although we often write 3.14159, etc., actually if you kept on calculating 22 over 7, would it go on forever? Is that how pi works?
Yeah, so people have historically tried to come up with a answer. What is pi? So I think Archimedes used geometry, drew I think a 96-sided shape inside a circle and outside, and tried to come up with an approximation. And then in the 1700s, a mathematician called Lambert proved it's irrational. So you can't write pi as a ratio of two whole numbers. And then in the 1880s, a mathematician proved it's transcendental, showing that actually you can't determine its exact value. So actually it does go on forever and it never repeats. And one of the cool things about pi is technically all of our birthdays are there, all our date of death, all our date of engagement, our favourite number, our recipe, our favourite mathematical recipes for cakes. Everything is inside pi, because it goes on forever.
So if you give enough monkeys, enough calculators, eventually they'll reproduce pi.
Exactly.
So the monkeys will always be reproducing a part of pi, right?
They are.
Whatever they type.
Yeah.
Very intelligent, really.
If one of your students writes down the wrong number for pi, then I guess they could always claim that they've got...
They could. Don't. I hope none of my students are listening to this.
But more seriously, for a second, Bobby, what actually is pi used for, and how is it derived? How did they actually get to this magic number, which is incredibly powerful?
So pi essentially is the ratio between the circumference and diameter of a circle. So no matter how small or big a circle, that is approximately, again, roughly just 3 times, a bit larger than 3 times. And in school, we've seen people use approximation 22 over 7. That's 3.142857 recurring, or 3.14. But again, that ratio... It never ends, and we use it for, I guess, in physics, in areas, and in real life. But it's something which I think mathematicians currently, there's one mathematician, a computer scientist in Japan, that I think earlier in 2019 used 25 computers over 121 days and came up with 31 trillion digits to pi. Again, but still...
And is this really useful? Because don't NASA, just for the purposes of their calculations, stop at something like 5 or 7 decimal places? They're satisfied that that's good enough.
Yes, and I think I've read somewhere that with 32 digits of pi, you can then estimate the size of the universe to like 1 proton's width. So actually,
is that right, Fran? Just put you on the spot there.
It sounds plausible.
Yeah, so we don't need 31 trillion digits. I'm sorry for the person who set that world record.
So there you go, Dee. The answer is yes, pi does go on forever, and if you look hard enough, you're going to find your birthday in there.
Hello, I'm Chris Barrow, bringing you a brand new podcast called Naked Gaming. This is where we look at gaming news.
If you have a hit, if you make a first game and it hits, it's incredibly hard to recreate that in the second game.
Reviews. Is it wrong to give a game 0 out of 10? That feels...
Oh, I love it. Go for it.
Okay, I'm just going to go hard in here. 0 out of 10. Don't waste your money. And we also go back in time with Retro Revival.
I think I'm a hypocrite because last time I'm like, oh, well, they just made the same game again and that's bad. But this time I'm like, nah, it's pretty good. I'm happy with that.
Make the same game.
Make it again.
Download it now wherever you get your podcasts.
On the way, does playing a clarinet or other woodwind instruments change your lung shape? How do bees make beeswax? And what's inside a quark? If you're a Trekkie, you'll be familiar with the word quark. Dan's looking at me because he's a Trekkie. But and Bobby's a Trekkie, honorary Trekkie as well. The quark character was just a person, but they named him after the fact there are subatomic particles, these things that make up the bits inside atoms. And this question wants to know what's inside one of those. Meanwhile, don't forget we've got our Guess Who game going. We're giving you a series of clues across the programme. You have to try and identify what this thing is. Bhavesh got on Twitter and said this sounds like a bear. I'll just remind you what this thing sounds like. More clues coming up, but Mark says, is that a hedgehog? Which I know is one of Eleanor's favourite things. Liam on Twitter says that sounds like a horse. Anybody here like to speculate?
I'd go with a horse.
Yeah, it sounds like a horse.
It's not a horse.
Yeah, well, I would say horse, but I know this radio show, so if it's going to be something really weird.
Could it be a hippopotamus?
Fran's going hippo.
That's nice.
Second clue is they stand on average at just over 100 centimetres at the shoulder, although this does vary between breeds. Does that revise your thinking at all, everybody? Anyone got any further speculation?
We're all trying to...
Everyone's got their arm up. How tall is a metre? Right, okay. So anyway, more clues coming up. Meanwhile, Bobby Seagull's with us. You've got a book sitting there on the top. Is this it? Is this the new
Yes,
tome you've just put out?
The life-changing magic of numbers.
When's it out?
So it was out...
Just come out?
September, yeah, that's right.
Brilliant. And what's it about?
So it's partly autobiographical, but it's partly an ode to numbers, because I know that as a maths teacher, if I go into sort of a dinner party or meet friends at a pub and say, I love maths, I'm a maths teacher, pretty much the first reaction from most people, not all people, and not the esteemed audience here or our listeners, our dear listeners, they'll be like, oh God, maths, I hated it. I couldn't do it at school. What's the point of it? And my book is almost like a soft manifesto showing actually maths is quite cool, quite fun, and appears in unexpected places.
All right, you've got 1 minute to convince us that maths is quite cool, quite fun, and appears in unexpected places. Take it away.
Okay, so unexpected place is in dating. I am currently single, and I am trying to use maths to help me to be unsingle.
That's not a good opening line, is it?
It's not. It's not because of maths. Separate, not causation. So firstly, I used a adapted version of Drake's hypothesis to estimate the number of alien civilizations in our galaxy. And again,
you want to date an alien? You're getting really,
I know.
You're getting really desperate now, Bobby.
Okay, so initially I've used a hypothesis from Drake and come up with my own version, and I've worked out there's 73 people I could date in the UK. That doesn't sound good. But the
hang on a minute. There's 65 million people in the UK, and there are just 75 that suit your parameters. I mean, how stringent are you being?
Yeah, I think it's perhaps because I'm someone that likes Verdi, but Stormzy, but Bake Off, but Love Island. So I've got my own issues. That's separate. So the interesting part is I use something called optimal stopping theory to work out how many dates I need to go on.
And how many? Is it within a lifetime? Is this
No.
doable?
So imagine I say I want to get married in 5 years, and I'm prepared to go on 2 dates a week for 50 weeks. That's 100 dates, and over 5 years, 500. So actually, optimal stopping theory, E from the exponential. So 1 over E gives us roughly 37%. And optimal stopping theory says I need to go on 37% of my total 500 dates. That's 185 dates. And I can't accept any of them. I have to reject all of them, no matter if they love Bake Off and Love Island and Universe Challenge. And then the person after the 185th date that's better than all the previous ones, she's the one. Obviously, she has to accept as well. That's a separate.
It sounds like a fallacy, though, because there's an equal chance that the first date you go on will be your dream lifetime partner, surely, compared with the person who's one after the 37.5th percentage.
But we don't know. The person could turn up as the first or the second or the third.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So why are you saying you want to go on with the one straight after?
Again, I probably need a pen and paper, but 1 over E, 1 over 2.72, turns out to be in any sort of decision where, let's say you want to buy a house and you've got 100 houses you want to look at, or you want to buy a pair of shoes, it tells you that roughly about a third of the way through, you need to discard the first third, or 37%. And then after that, mathematically, you should get the best solution.
And how far through your 185 dates are you?
About 9.
You've got a long way to go. Okay, so you've convinced me that you can overthink things. What's the next fun and fantastic fact that we can learn about in the book?
Ooh, fantastic fact. Comes back to cicadas. Because, again, my students, we were learning about prime numbers recently, and they often say, "Oh, sir, but Mr. Seagull, prime numbers, you only use them in exam. I never see them anywhere in nature." And then we brought up, when you mentioned what's the most intelligent insect, and I always love telling my students about the cicadas. And these are little tiny creatures, apparently very tasty. And it's only because I've seen them in a documentary, and Marcus de Sastoy says they are tasty, so I take his word. But again, the fact that they've evolutionarily developed the fact that emerging in 7, 13 or 17-year cycles evades predators. I think that's amazing, because had they picked 12, let's say, then any predator that emerges every 2, 3, 4 or 6 years will eventually overlap with it. And that for me is amazing. Shows that actually mathematics is something that not just humans practice, but insects.
Sounds like a slightly dodgy argument though, Bobby, because the thing is, nature's very good at finding an opportunity. And maybe you can prop me up on this one, Eleanor. But the fact is, if the cicadas have evolved to do that, then surely things that like lunching on cicadas would have evolved convergently to do the same thing, wouldn't they? Why haven't they?
It's a really good question, and one to which I would love to know the answer. But I don't know of any predators who follow this pattern. I guess in this particular case, you'd have to have a predator who was like specialised in eating cicadas. So I'm guessing that they are banking on the fact that you get a lot of generalist predators who wouldn't bother to adapt specifically to eat them. But you never know, they might catch up one day.
I think he sort of nailed it on the head there, because an entomologist called Stephen Jay Gould, he said that potential predators often have shorter life cycles, 2 to 5 years, so they can't really stretch and keep up with the ones who are greedy enough to stay for 13 or 17 years.
Bobby, it sounds like a terrific book. Remind me of the title again?
It's called The Life-Changing Magic of Numbers.
There you go. Bobby's book out now.
And
The
a signed
Life-Changing
copy is coming for you,
and he's going to send me a signed copy, and then I'll know exactly how many more dates I don't need to go on. And you have to, when you come back on the programme, you can update us and tell us how you're getting on, Bobby. Eleanor, we've just been talking about creepy crawlies and cicadas. Can you help out Jay on our forum, nakedscientist.com/forum? He says, who's better at climbing? Is it spiders or geckos? And why don't spiders get stuck on their own webs?
I absolutely loved researching this question. Thank you very, very much for sending it in. I spent a lot of time looking up this, and I'm absolutely thrilled to say that it's spiders that are better climbers than geckos. Fascinatingly, they use a very similar mechanism to stick to stuff, and it's due to tiny, tiny, tiny hairs in their fingers, which...
Fingers? Spiders have fingers now?
Well, yeah, feet, pads,
legs.
toes, legs, yeah, spidery things. But yeah, tiny, tiny, tiny hairs, which interact with the surfaces that they stick to in a molecular manner. So they're actually held on by van der Waals forces. And so if, like me, you've spent quite a lot of time looking up the different... You can find out how sticky these animals are to the different surfaces and then divide them by the body weight of the animal. If you compare a jumping spider to a tokay gecko, you will find that actually the jumping spider is 3 times more sticky than the gecko.
And just to be clear, the way they stick on is that their fingers, whatever you want to dub them, have tiny hairs, and those hairs get very close to the thing they're trying to climb onto.
Yeah.
And the electrical attractions between those tiny hair surfaces and the thing they're trying to climb on gives them enormous sticking power.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible.
So why don't they stick to their own web then?
I don't know.
I mean, one theory I did hear is that those hairs are very spiky. And so the droplets on the web are the sticky bits. If you look at a web, it's got blobs of sticky stuff. And the spider, A, knows where they are, so it puts its feet somewhere else, and B, the hairs are quite sharp, and so the blobs tend to go towards the end, like falling off a needle.
Oh, wow.
And so they easily detach, whereas other insects that are the prey, get stuck in them because they have big, juicy hairs that are less easy to disengage, so they just get stuck, and other bits of the insect body get stuck as well. So the spider's canny. It knows A, to use its feet, and where to put its feet, and to have hairy feet that are hairy with sharp hairs, so the spider can detach easily.
They're just incredible. However, the stickiness thing that comes with a caveat. It depends on the gecko and depends on the spider. You get some geckos and some spiders that are more or less sticky than others.
They're still amazing though, aren't they? Eleanor, thank you very much. Fran, this is from Susan. And I must admit, I'm intrigued to hear what you're going to say about this, because Susan says normally the answer for what are electrons, protons and neutrons made of is quarks. But if that's the case, then what are quarks made of? All elements are supposed to be made of atoms. That's why you say don't believe anything an atom says, because they make up everything. Quarks are the building blocks of atoms, so they can't be made of atoms. So what are quarks made of?
Okay, so there's a lot going on in this question. It's a very good question that's been puzzling physicists. Firstly, just a few pedantic points. Electrons aren't made of quarks. Only protons and neutrons are made of quarks. And when we say elements are made of atoms, we're talking about chemical elements, so things like oxygen, hydrogen, potassium, not subatomic particles like quarks. Quarks are, of course, not made of atoms. As you point out, that would be kind of circular. So electrons and quarks are what we call fundamental particles. And this means that so far, however much energy we've thrown at them, we've collided them with each other with as much energy as we can in particle colliders. And they've never broken into smaller parts. There's never been any evidence that they're made up of anything at all. Now, it might be that if we just put in more energy, they will break apart, and then we'll find out what they're made of. Or it might be that they're truly fundamental, that they're not made of anything. One thing that helps to understand how this can be, how there can be something that isn't made of anything, is to think about quantum field theory, which is really the most fundamental theory we have about how the universe works. Quantum field theory asks the question, what is an electron really? And the answer to that question is that an electron is a kind of ripple in the electron field, this entity that covers all of space and time. It's the same for every other particle. We think that what we call particles are ripples or waves in fields that have spanned the universe since the Big Bang. It's like ripples on a pond. And these fields are really the fundamental objects of the universe, not the particles. And anything more than that, what are the fields made of? Well, that we don't know.
So when we pick up an oxygen atom, there's stuff in there which you're saying happens to be in that space is a bunch of ripples that are in that particular point in space and time.
Yes.
Ripples in the fabric of space.
Yes.
So when I move that atom, I'm moving those ripples around. So the ripples are a distortion, but they can move.
Yeah, so one thing to clarify is that these quantum fields, a field allocates a number to every point in space. So like the electric field would have a value everywhere. It's not the fabric of space-time in the sense that we talk about when we talk about gravity. So these are fields that cover space, but when there's a ripple, we don't see it gravitationally in the same way that, say, a black hole causes space to bend.
So could these things be sitting in some other bizarre dimension that we see it in the dimensions that we're familiar with interacting with, but there are other dimensions that we can't, so they're hidden from us, let's say, and that's where actually the thing that gives the quark its existence is sitting, and actually the vibrations or the repercussions of that are manifest as these ripples that we see as a part of an oxygen atom here on Earth right now, but actually it's some other entity in some other dimension that we just don't know it's there.
There are theories that postulate extra dimensions, in particular to explain why gravity is so weak because it's acting over more dimensions, but we just don't know. When these quantum particles that are described as ripples interact with each other, you can think of it a bit as when you have ripples travelling along in water, they can interact with each other. And when I pick up an atom and move it, remember that my hand is also basically a ripple. So that's just the ripple that is my hand interacting with the ripple that is the oxygen atom.
So is just ploughing more and more energy into more and more exotic collisions just not really the best way to go with this? Because we're not actually going to discover, because that's not the way to unlock what lies downstream of these particles.
It's possible, and we are trying lots of different approaches. So my research in particular is using astrophysical observations to look at really all kinds of different extreme environments to try and learn more about particle physics. But I do think there's an awful lot of value in just building a bigger particle collider. Smashing stuff together with increasing energy has worked for scientists for many centuries, and I don't see a reason to stop now.
The Naked Scientists podcast is produced in association with Spitfire, Cost-effective voice, internet and IP engineering services for UK businesses. Find out how Spitfire can empower your company at spitfire.co.uk.
Music in the programme is sponsored by Epidemic Sound, perfect music for your audio and video productions.
With me are a panel of experts who are taking on your science questions. They are animal behaviour boffin Eleanor Drinkwater, physics fanatic Fran Day, exercise expert Dan Gordon, and numbers nut Bobby Seagull. If you'd like to ask a question on a programme like this, why not tweet at Naked Scientists, or you can email us. It's chris@thenakedscientist.com. Don't forget, we're running our Guess Who, where you have to work out what the mystery animal is. It's running across the programme. So far, we heard the noise that it makes. It sounds like this. I also told you they stand roughly 100 centimetres tall at the shoulder, and your third clue is a female of one of these is called a genet. A female of one of these is a genet. Anyone any the wiser yet?
No.
Excellent. Our experts are baffled. So stay tuned. Coming up is your final clue. While you think about the questions and have a think about what else our Guess Who might be, it's going to be quiz time. And this is where we ask our panel of experts some other harder questions to see how they fare. We've got two teams. Team 1 are going to be Fran and Dan, and Team 2 are going to be Bobby and Eleanor. And round 1 is called Around the World. So please confer, you two, Fran and Dan. Team 1, which of the following mega cities, referred to as cities of more than 10 million people, has the biggest population? Karachi, Moscow, or Istanbul?
I just don't know. Do you know?
I would take a guess at Karachi.
Yeah, that sounds plausible. Let's just go with that.
You going Karachi?
Yes.
Yep, that is correct. Karachi's got 18... Bobby sounds so surprised.
I was expecting Istanbul.
No. Karachi's got 18 million people. Istanbul's snapping at its heels, though, 14.5 million. And Moscow, just over 13. London, though, way down the list, nearer 9 million. Team 2, Eleanor and Bobby. According to the Guinness Book of World Records, which is the biggest? You have to listen to these carefully. The smallest country in the world, the smallest republic in the world, or the smallest colony in the world?
The smallest country, smallest republic, smallest colony. Smallest country is the Vatican. It's about 0.44
Yes, I would.
kilometers.
Yeah.
The smallest republic and the smallest...
Well, I'd say the smallest colony would probably be a colony of ants, probably, but
Okay.
if that's not the answer, I'm going to be very disappointed.
So which is the largest of the three? Smallest republic. What is a republic? We're getting into quite political terms. Are we a republic yet? No, we're not.
Yeah.
Oof, I don't know.
Gonna have to hurry you.
I'm going to go for colony, because if it is the animal route, which I'm obviously predisposed to think it is, then you can talk about super colonies, and they can stretch across huge distances.
Let's go for that.
Yeah.
Do you know, I think I would be tempted to give you a bonus for really clever thinking. Okay,
Thank you.
It's not actually right. I'm gonna have to give you a.
I'm sorry.
But I thought it was ingenious thinking, so I'll give you half a point for that because. And actually, some of those mega colonies of ants, though, Eleanor, are huge, though, aren't they? Which makes them bigger than. In fact, probably Vatican City, which is tiny. That's just 0.44 square kilometres. And I'm pretty sure there are ant mega colonies which span a bigger area than that.
Definitely.
But the answer to the quiz question is the smallest republic is Nauru, which is in the Pacific Ocean, 21 square kilometres. Smallest colony? Anyone? Any ideas? Gibraltar. It's 5.8 square kilometres on that one. Okay, so we've got, you're just about in the lead, Fran and Dan, with half a point in it. Next round 2, tech yes or tech no? Which of the following is a tech no? In other words, which one did we make up? Okay, of these three.
Right.
A bed that tucks you in at night, a frying pan that counts calories in your dinner, or a games console for your pet pooch? Which one is a tech no?
Oh, man, they all sound like they could be made.
Yeah, I think the dog games console, if that doesn't exist, then I'm going to make it. So, a bed that tucks you in.
I've seen the bed that tucks you in.
Oh, really?
I'm pretty sure I've seen that.
Isn't it kind of dangerous? And
I'm pretty sure I've seen something on Facebook that does this. Facebook
so
shows
there's
everything.
these gravity blankets that are just really heavy.
Yeah, I'm sure I've seen something which is designed for people who are disabled that it in essence, I don't know how it works. I seem to remember seeing something that the sheets are able and the blankets are able to pull themselves across.
Right. So how would the frying pan thing work, though? Because the way I know to see how many calories are in something is to burn it. Then you wouldn't have any dinner, so that's not ideal.
So we talked ourselves into it. Should we go with the frying pan?
Yeah, let's go with the frying pan.
You're going, techno is the frying pan.
Yeah.
No.
No, actually, it is the bed.
It is the bed.
The bed is the techno. The frying pan, the frying pan comes with its own app and a built-in scale, so it can weigh and then quantify how many calories you're allegedly going to get. The games console, the idea of that is that your dog does a little puzzle and it gets a treat in return for its labours. So, unfortunately, no points for that one. So, currently the scores stand at 1 point to Dan and Fran, half a point to Eleanor and Bobby. Your chance to take the lead here, Eleanor and Bobby. Same question. Which of the following is a techno? A mask for your mouth to stop you annoying everyone around you having loud phone conversations. A phone soap or smart hair bobbles. They tell you when they're about to snap before your hairdo collapses.
A mask for your mouth?
Yeah, but also the hair bubbles thing. Like, I mean, if you're wearing it in your hair, then if it's about to snap, then you wouldn't be able to tell because it would be in your hair.
So it sounds ludicrous, you think?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who wears hair bubbles, I think this sounds not very useful. But then again, just because it's not very useful doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. But yeah, the mask.
What are you going to go for then?
Hair bubble sounds.
Yeah, but then again, the mask for your mouth sounds bizarre as well.
I want to invent that. That sounds good. So go for the hair bubbles.
Okay, we can go the hair bubbles.
You're going to go hair bubbles?
Yeah.
You're going to go hair bubbles?
Yeah.
It is. Right. So 1.5 points to Eleanor and Bobby so far. So they're half a point ahead. It could all be on this one. Here we go. Okay, round 3. This is potentially the decider. This round is called On the Other Foot. This is where we ask the team something about something that the other team probably know quite a bit about. And so you have to keep very quiet, the team, and then you can gloat when they do or don't get it right. So, Fran and Dan, according to Wikipedia, which of these is the smallest mammal? The bumblebee bat, which is a vulnerable bat species with a reddish-brown or grey coat and a pig-like snout. The Etruscan shrew, which looks a bit like a mouse but has an elongated nose and eats mainly insects. Or the long-tailed planigale, which is a small marsupial, also looks a bit like a mouse, has a flattened head, and it can get through very narrow cracks. What do you think?
They all sound small.
Yeah.
All of the above.
Yeah.
Well, the last one must be quite small to get through very narrow cracks.
But then mice
in the description.
But you said that the shrew was apparently mouse size as well.
Oh. Yeah, maybe it's the bat.
Maybe it's the
some
bat.
because it's called the bumblebee bat, and bumblebees are smaller than mice.
Should we just do it?
Okay, we think it's the bat.
Yeah.
You're going to go with the bat?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
High five.
Yes. Well, Eleanor and Bobby, what's the diameter of a neutron star? Is it 20 kilometres, 20,000 kilometres, or 20 million kilometres across?
Neutron star presumably is quite small.
I have no clue.
So 20,000, or what was the last one? 20 million.
Yeah.
20 kilometres sounds that sounds like more black hole-y. How about 20,000?
Yes, I agree.
20, the middle option.
Going for 20,000?
Yeah.
No!
Did you know that, Fran?
Yeah, it's 20 kilometres.
It is 20 kilometres,
Oh my
yeah.
God, I get that.
Yep. Neutron stars are actually very small. They're actually roughly the size of a city in terms of diameter, and a teaspoonful of one would weigh about 10 million tonnes. Wow. Our own sun, in comparison, 1.4 million kilometres in diameter. Wow. So there you go. Our big brain winners of the week are Dan and Fran. Give yourselves a big round of applause. Very well done. Dan, back to the questions. Are you musical, by the way?
Well, if you ask my wife, I am absolutely tone deaf.
Okay, so that's a no from her then.
Yeah.
We've got this question that has come in from Bruce.
Does the form or function of a wind instrument player's lungs differ from the norm?
This is actually a really interesting question. The answer is no. And I think that's quite surprising. So there's been a number of studies that have been done where they've compared using different methods. I mean, the classic method is just using measures of respiratory function. So looking at total lung capacities, measuring things like fractional extraction. So you measure the amount of air that's extracted in one second, for example. Looking at residual volume. So we all have a residual volume. If you don't have a residual volume, the lung collapses. So they've measured all of these. And actually what they've found is when you compare a wind instrument player to a non-instrument player, there is no difference in any of these measures at all. What is different, of course, is the way in which the lungs are used. There are differences, for example, in the strength of the diaphragm. There are differences in the way in which the lung is filled. But the thing I found really fascinating about this, which actually when I sat down and thought about it, I thought actually makes an awful lot of sense, is the wind instrument players actually have a lot of inflammation in the lung. And actually they have a lot of lung damage. And actually, if you put it into the context and you think about it really logically, it's the same as you'd see in any, I'm going to spin it to athletes, aren't I? It's the same as you'd see in an athlete. If you are doing vast amounts of repeat work where you're stressing something to its maximum, you cause inflammatory responses. And so what they're finding in these wind instrument players is actually if you measure their lung function on a scale, looks worse than the general population because they've just caused these inflammatory responses.
Thanks very much, Dan. Fran, one for you. This is from Martin, who's contacted us on Facebook.
What I don't understand is that I hear that we can detect radiation, background radiation, that apparently emanates from the Big Bang. So how is this possible? That electromagnetic radiation moves at the speed of light. So if we, the Earth, were created atomically from the Big Bang, and we took billions of years to form, to make the Earth that we are now, surely all the radiation that came at the Big Bang is long gone. It's long ahead of us. The only explanation that I can work out is that the radiation bounces around until it's detected, but then it could have come from anywhere. And if it bounces from the edge of the universe, then where's that?
I think what's being referred to here is the cosmic microwave background. This is radiation that was produced 400,000 years after the Big Bang, but in cosmic timescales, that's nothing. And it was produced at a time in the universe when electrons and protons were combining to make neutral hydrogen, and that produces all of these photons. And this happened everywhere in the universe at once. So it didn't just happen at a point, it happened across the universe. Now, since that time, 400,000 years after the Big Bang, the universe has been expanding. So this radiation, these photons, have just been travelling through the universe as it expanded. And the effect that that has is to stretch them. So the effect of the expansion of the universe is that we see the radiation, the light, from the cosmic microwave background as having a longer wavelength. But because the universe is expanding, everything just expands in that together. So the radiation is everywhere in the universe. And the stuff that we see is the stuff that just happens to be where you are. But it's just travelling through this ever-expanding universe.
One argument I heard for this that put it, I thought, quite well, and you can tell me, Fran, the point that was made is that for something to be sending us radiation like this from all directions argues that the stuff which is across the universe must have at some time all been together in one place and shared the energy of the Big Bang equally amongst all those particles, so that when the universe then inflated very, very fast, which it did far faster than light and everything else in the very early phases of the universe, it took all those bits with it that had shared all that energy, and now they are busy radiating that energy in all directions at us. And as you say, because the universe is also inflated, it stretched the light out, so we see this stuff at very long wavelengths, but it's coming at us from all directions because the material that it was all part of in the very early universe is now everywhere. And so it's now sending us radiation whichever way we look.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's really why the cosmic microwave background is very, very uniform in all directions, which is quite surprising because it's spread across the whole universe. And this is one of the reasons we think we need this period of inflation where the universe expanded very, very quickly at the start of the universe so that it can all have been together at one stage.
We're answering the science questions that you have been sending in. Before we get to more of the questions, it's time for another of the clues for our Guess Who. Two people who've now got very, very close to the thing that sounds, remember, like... sounds like that. A metre at the shoulder. Female is called a jennet, or a jenny. I kept that back because I thought that would give too much away. A gelding is the term for the male that's had its bits removed. Final clue, they've also been bred with other members of the Equidae family. A hinny, for instance, is a cross between one of these and a male horse, a female one of those and a male horse, for example. So anyone got any ideas what it might be?
I have. I'm about to say, could it be a donkey?
Yep, you're absolutely right, Eleanor. Yes! It was. It's a donkey. So Ed on Twitter, well done. And also Les, you both said donkey. So very well done to you. Now, Eleanor, over to you. And Blake's Tiger on our forum says, bees make honey, but where does the wax come from?
Oh, it's pretty adorable. So it also comes from the bees. So it's the youngest bees in the hive. Essentially what they do is they huddle together. They raise their body temperatures and then they start producing little tiny drops of wax from glands under their abdomen. And then the older workers can come and kind of harvest this wax from the younger workers. But it's incredibly costly to make. For about 1 gram of wax, it takes about 6 grams of honey to produce. So it's very, very valuable within the hive.
So the bees have glands in their bodies that turn the energy in honey into wax, because wax is a hydrocarbon. It is you can burn it, can't you? It's like oil.
Yeah.
So how are they turning honey, which is sugar, into oil?
With difficulty. And the interesting thing too is about the fact that they lose this ability as they get older. So it's within these glands that they can do this, and it's only within a certain period of this animal's life cycle, which is really cool.
Thanks for that, Eleanor. Meanwhile, Dan, we've got this question here for you, which comes from Phil.
Hiya, my question is, what is the longest someone can hold their breath? And can you train yourself to get better at it?
Now, I love this question because I always impress my kids because I take them swimming and I can do multiple lengths underwater in the swimming pool. I seem to have a really good tolerance for sustained breath holding or anoxia. It might come in handy if I go up Everest, doesn't it? How long can you guys hold your breath for? Has anyone tried in here, or am I just?
I've tried.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question.
But what's the answer then, Dan?
We've got to be slightly careful because there's a lot of information out there which is slightly misleading. So the current world record for holding breath is 11 minutes 33 seconds.
Oh my goodness.
Now, you will see that there are also reports out there of somebody being able to hold it for 24 minutes and 3 seconds. So the caveat on that one is they were allowed to breathe 100% pure oxygen.
What, before?
So what they did was they breathed 100% pure oxygen, and it's still extraordinary, and then held their breath for 24 minutes and 3 seconds. But if we go with what's recognised in breath-holding circles, and it's actually part of the free diving community. So if you look at the free diving challenges, it's not just about how deep somebody can dive. It's actually the second challenge is having somebody lying just in a swimming pool and holding their breath. And it was a couple of years ago, 2016, it was 11 minutes 33. Actually, there's a couple of real simple parts to this. We all have what's called the mammalian dive reflex, and it's designed to prevent us from dying very, very quickly in water. If you hold your breath, your heart rate slows down. And part of that is you start to get a vasoconstriction in the periphery. So what happens is that oxygenated blood, rather than going into the limbs, is actually going primarily to the brain. Still a lot going to the heart, but the majority is going to the brain. And we see this in any mammal.
Can I just clarify then, Dan? So by pushing all the blood towards the central organs, heart and brain, you're basically stopping the rest of the body having dibs into the oxygen that's in there. So those crucial organs, heart and brain, which are most oxygen deprivation sensitive, they've got longer to have dibs at the oxygen you have got. Is that why this works?
So what's happening is if you imagine you've got X amount of oxygen and you reduce the amount of oxygen going to the periphery, then that oxygen can be used. And the key variable here is the brain. What you don't want to be using is that oxygen in the limbs and so on and so forth, because you're just burning up inverse comms energy. The second part, and this is why all these records are broken in water, is we have what are called the trigeminal nerves, which are in the face. And actually, if you put somebody's face into cold water, the trigeminal nerves are actually acted upon, and they actually cause an inhibitory effect, again, on heart rate. So through the autonomic nervous system, the heart rate then slows down. So you get not only the mammalian dive reflex, but you get this secondary effect. And so when they go for these breath-holding records, they always do them in fairly cold water. Can we train for this? So I'm going to put a caveat here, which is please, please, please do not try this at home, okay? Because what we don't want to hear is people passing out and fainting and so on and so forth. The first thing to recognise is these individuals have incredibly large lungs. A typical lung capacity is 4 to 6 litres. Most breath-hold divers have a lung capacity in excess of 10 litres.
Did they always have that, Dan? Or have they got better?
You can't increase lung capacity. So this is one of the interesting things. When you look at athletes can increase everything. You know, heart size can increase and muscle mass can increase. Lung capacity cannot increase. you get what you've given. And so these guys have got this natural genetic endowment, so about 10 litre lung capacity, which is fundamentally important. They've actually got increased haemoglobin concentration. They've got greater red blood cell counts. So what they've got is a greater oxygen transport system and an oxygen utilisation system.
And a better reserve in the blood in the first place. You've got more places to store it for longer.
Correct. So there's a lot of work that's been done out in places like the Karolinska Institute. And what they found is that the key is relaxation. If you imagine that the brain is where the majority of this oxygenated blood is going to, the last thing you want to be doing is thinking about what you're having for dinner. Because as soon as you do that, the brain is active, the brain is then going to use that very, very limited store of oxygen. So there was some work that was done actually in the UK a number of years ago where they measured EEG patterns in breath hold divers. And what they were looking at was when they got them to do just a breath hold, they were looking at the EEG patterns and they found that the best breath hold... This is the brainwave activity. And what they found in the best breath hold divers was that the brainwave activity it was almost like watching somebody shut a computer down. These signals just started to decrease. And the guys that were new to breath hold diving actually had very active brains. So the first thing is relaxation. They talk about doing what's called progressive muscle relaxation, which is a technique that's used to prevent things like anxiety, which is the idea that you go through tensing the feet first and relaxing the feet, then the calves, then the quadriceps, and you do this across the whole body to put yourself in a state of relaxation. The second thing that you have to do is the best athletes do is what's called lung packing, whereby you basically overpack the lung with air. Most of us really don't actually use our lungs to their full capacity. And lung packing is a technique whereby you use the glottis to, in essence, get more air into the lungs and inflate the lungs and inflate the lungs and inflate the lungs. There is a downside to this, which is why I was saying please don't try this at home, which is that actually this starts to then cause decreases in carbon dioxide concentration. And so the net result is that people just start to pass out. What they showed in a number of studies is that you can take people who can hold their breath. Typically, most people can hold their breath for about a minute and a half. And actually, if you go through this progressive muscle relaxation and even do a very basic form of lung packing, most people will be able to get to 4 minutes, 4.5 minutes.
I know you said don't try it at home. Next time I'm in the bath, I might give it a little go. Well, thanks for that really comprehensive account, Dan. That was brilliant. Now, Bobby, Matt has been in touch on Twitter and says, can you share your views on the future of maths in football and sport? Can processing data be a real competitive advantage for teams? And what techniques might they use? What might they learn?
It's a good question because in America, a film came out a few years ago called Moneyball, and it showed how they used something called sabermetrics, where they looked at players that were undervalued compared to what the market rated them. So it transformed baseball. So actually, every team in baseball started using this to the point where actually it lost its competitive advantage. What we've seen in football is that there's a bit of resistance because sometimes you see, like I played a lot of football, managers, coaches saying, it's all about the gut feel, you can tell if the player's good or not. But there are also other teams like Brentford Football Club, they use a lot of data and metrics. They actually get data scientists in. And I think it's one where for young players, perhaps you can use it for like how many kilometers they're running in a game and the amount of passes. And it's definitely helpful. But I think football and sport, it's still where there are other things like guts and honesty, integrity, someone running like David Beckham in 2001 running the yard because he really wanted something, where I think it's hard to metricize sport like football.
There's a huge human factor, is that what you were going to say?
Well, I was partly, but I was going to say actually a lot of sports really are buying into this. I mean, we know, for example, now rugby uses this kind of approach. It came from American football. I mean, it is data driven. And now what they're using is GPS monitoring, so live GPS monitoring. And you have these guys who are performance analysts. It's not just about the physicality. They're starting to now get into trying to look at, and Bobby will know this, the terminology better than I do, but they're starting to do this kind of analysis about movement patterns. So the way in which these individuals swarm. To the point now they've looked at this in Tour de France cyclists. So the Australian Institute of Sport have been looking at this. It's the same kind of research they've been doing on when you watch these swarms of birds. And they've been taking that same approach to say, well, actually, the peloton in the Tour de France will swarm in this kind of way. And when it swarms in this kind of way, we know these things start to happen. So it's being used in multiple different ways in different sports. And Bobby's point's right. I mean, there are certain sports which I think are slightly reticent about using this and still perhaps go with the gut feeling approach. But this kind of performance analysis is really pretty much embedded. I mean, dare I say, even teams like Cambridge United are using this approach, because actually it gives you enormous information. I mean, very briefly, I was out in Brazil recently, and I was at two of the big teams in Brazil, and they were showing me how they're using this performance analysis data to now be able to work out and say to the manager, right, based upon this data that we're getting, this player is now at a risk of injury. And so what they've been able to do is then take that data and then link that to metrics that they've got in terms of measures, actual measures of injury. And it ties up really nicely. So they can look at this on-field data and say, right, based upon this data, you need to pull this player out of the game. And Cruzeiro, which is one of the big clubs in Brazil, have been using this, and it's proved to be really quite successful.
Bobby?
I think the sports where they're individuals, let's say running or swimming, I think you can use data because then you can work on individual performance. But when there's like multiple factors, it becomes very complicated. Like I think football, even rugby, I think the more there are multiple variables, I think the more difficult it is to use computer science to help predict.
Do you think this is having any impact on mental health of the players? You know, I can imagine if you're being monitored like that, it would certainly make me feel uncomfortable.
I mean, that's a fascinating question, isn't it? And I think the mental health part is huge in sport. And I don't think we have never looked at that kind of association between these metrics. But there is so much monitoring going on now with players.
But everyone says this, don't they? That they feel they're in a surveillance society, and it does have an impact. Yeah. But maybe it might improve performance.
Well, we're doing it because we think that it helps with performance. I mean, I know, British Cycling have been using this for years and years and years.
There we're going to have to leave it. Thanks very much for listening, and thank you for sending in your questions. Thanks also to our panel, who are Fran Day, Bobby Siegel, Eleanor Drinkwater and Dan Gordon. Katie Hayler put the programme together. Join us next time when we're going to be talking ciphers, spycraft and subterfuge, because we're delving into the world of code breaking. The Naked Scientist comes to you from Cambridge University, and it's supported by the EPSRC and Rolls-Royce. I'm Chris Smith. Thanks for listening, and until next time, goodbye.